Hello guys, FooXz here. In this video I would like to give you some insight on how to be fast at the Red Bull Ring. The layout of the track is very short, but at the same time is very challenging. Especially it's very tricky to manage those hard braking zones, which usually are mixed with a lot of bumps that makes things even harder. But not only the braking zones, also the accelerations are a critical point. You have to manage the power very carefully and pay close attention to the changes of elevations that happen to be on most of the corners exit. So yeah, you have a mix of very challenging braking zones and accelerations, but hopefully on this video we'll be able to help you guys master this track. So before going into the track, let's have a look at the settings. Before getting into that, I'm just gonna show you what it worked for me. I had a few laps with this bike and I noticed that the front end is really tricky. It usually tends to crash at the latter part of the braking zone, like when you're about to tip in the bike into the apex. It usually low sides, but after doing like 20 to 30 laps, I think I managed to find something that works really well for this bike. It's not perfect by any means, but I think it's a good compromise between stability and agility. So first things first, the suspension. Here you can have a look at what I have set on my bike. I would also like to explain why I chose these settings. Like for example, on the front suspension, the front preload, I think having it on 0 is the best choice, because you will have much more stable front end, which is very critical on MotoGP 21. So usually the best setting is having the front end on 0. You can also try going for a higher value to have a better lean angle, because as the bike gets taller you can increase the lean angle of the bike. So yeah, for this track go for 0. Then on oil quantity, usually I will go with 0, but because there's a lot of bumps that make the suspension bottom out and makes the bike really unstable, it's better to have a stiffer suspension, increasing the oil quantity. So have this on 8, so the bike doesn't bottom out and loses grip, loses traction on the front wheel. Then into the front spring harness, because we have the oil at the maximum, I think it's not necessary to have it at a higher value. On 0 seems to work pretty well. I tried it on 8 as well, but it really didn't make any difference. In fact, I felt the bike didn't manage to get that grip coming out of the turns. It was struggling to put the power down to accelerate. It was wheeling a bit more. So try it on 0, but you can fiddle with this as well, but for me this worked better at 0. Then the front swing arm, 0 as well. So it helps the bike soak up the bumps a little bit better. It's good to have it on 0. And the same thing on the last setting, the front swing arm extension. Having it on 0 helps with the bumps and increase the mechanical grip. Even though having this last value on the maximum or at a higher value will help you prevent rear lifts while braking or wheelies when you accelerate. In this specific track, I think it's more critical to manage those bumps, so have it at 0, so the bike will handle those bumps much better. Let's have a look at the rear suspension. Unlike the front end, the rear of the bike seems to be much more stable on MotoGP 21. Having this rear preload lower will increase traction, but then you will lack the necessary lean angle to approach the last part of the track, which is a bit more twisty, and also you will struggle tipping in the bike towards the latter part of the braking when you're just about to tip in the bike into the apex of the turn. If you have a lower preload, you will struggle. So after fiddling a little bit with this specific setting, I found out that 5 is the best compromise between grip and lean angle. So have this one on 5. Now into the swing arm connector, have this on the highest setting on 8. This will make the rear stiffer, which will help the bike handle those bumps at the track much better. It will not allow the rear of the bike to bottom out. That's always something that you have to prevent, bottoming out the suspension, because every time you bottom out, the bike loses grip. It's not the most efficient way to go around the track. But yeah, and then the rear spring harness, have it on 0. So this, having it like this, it will give the bike enough stiffness to handle those bumps, but also be soft enough to handle that transition, that weight transition when you get on the gas, and have that load on the rear of the bike to get grip and accelerate as fast as you can. So have this on 0. If you can try to have it at a higher value, but you will notice that the bike won't accelerate at all. At least for me, it didn't work at all. Now the shock compression, have this value on 8. As I said before, we need the bike to be as stable as possible while going over humps and dips. So have this value on 8. And then the shock up extension, have this on 0. So we will help us increase the mechanical grip and have the bike as stable as possible while cornering and facing those humps and dips. So basically what you see right now, for me, from what I tried, I did like 30 laps or so, I found for me this was the best way to approach the suspension settings. Now let's go into the geometry of the bike. So on the geometry, this is what I found that works the best on this track. So in short, this makes the front end agile enough to attack the corners, but also gives the bike enough stability on the rear end of the bike, so you can accelerate better coming out of the turns. This is what I found that works the best, but if you need more stability on the rear while getting on the acceleration, you can increase this last value, the rear swing arm length. Or if you feel like you are not having much problem handling the bike coming out of the turns, you can lower the value and have the bike more agile. For me, I think the rear swing arm length works best at 4, just at the middle. Like this, you have a good compromise between stability and agility. Now the transmission, here you can see the settings that I'm using for this bike at this track. The first few gears, I have a shorter gear ratio to make the gears longer and not as aggressive. It's really important to have these first few gears a little bit smoother, a little bit longer, so you don't struggle a lot with wheelie or putting the power down. Then on 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th gear, because we are already having no speed and the bike it doesn't have that problem of wheeling when you get into 3rd and 4th gear. You can have a more aggressive gear setting. You can have a higher gear ratio. Then the final ratio, I can have it on 6, but you can also try it on 5 or even 4, but for me it works very well at 6. Then the slipper clutch, it depends. If you feel confident enough, you can have it on 8. This will give you the most braking performance, but it might hinder you because you will feel a lot more understeer when attacking the corners, because the engine braking is much more aggressive. So I prefer the slipper clutch on 6. seems to work very well and to stop good enough, has a good enough stopping power, but also doesn't cause too much understeer to the bike. The brakes, I think you should try every brake, because some people like to brake late as possible, some people like to brake a little bit earlier and carry more speed through the turn. But for me, I think the 340 with the 1000 grams disc is the best choice. Has great performance, but also is not as heavy as the 1200 grams that makes the bike understeer a lot. It's more or less like it's what I said about the slipper clutch. The higher the value, the more the bike will understeer on the braking and when trying to tip into the turns. The same thing applies to the brake disc. The higher the performance, the more you will struggle with understeer. So on 340, the 1000 gram disc seems to work really well. You can even try the T20, but from what I tried, doesn't seem to have enough braking power for this track. And now the rear brake, I tried both seem to work really well, but sometimes the 200 works better, sometimes the 220 works better. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. Maybe it's a lack of practice in this track, but I don't know. Try both and see which one works best, but I couldn't say which one of these works better. Try both and see which one works best for you. Now the ECU, here you can have a look at the settings. Traction control, have it on 3. It's the best balance. The electronics will help you keep the bike under control without speeding too much the rear tire, but they won't cut too much, because the higher that you go with this value, the more intrusive it will be. And sometimes it's not bad to have a little bit of wheel spin. It will actually help the bike steer into the turn. But have this value on 3, it works very well. If you feel you can handle all the power that the bike can give you, you can even try 2. That works really well, but it's a bit harder to handle the bike with the traction control on 2 or even 1. But for me, on 3 is the best balance. Engine braking, set it on 4. You will have enough stopping power without locking the rear wheel. I think 5 is a bit too much. You will have understeer problems if you have this on 5. Kinda like it happens with the brakes. The more powerful your brakes are, the more the bike will understeer. So have this value on 4. Anti-wheelie on 3 works very well. It's more or less like we talked about the traction control. Set this value on 3, so it kicks in just enough to keep the front wheel down, but it doesn't. It's not as too intrusive that it will make the bike lose acceleration, because the electronics are cutting too much power. So have this on 3. It's the best balance. If you still are struggling with wheelies, you maybe can try it on 4, but for me it's a bit too intrusive. And last but not least, the power map, and this is pretty easy. Just have it on 3 and you're good to go. Finally, let's talk about tires. This is pretty much straightforward. There's not a lot to talk about this. If you want the most performance out of the bike, you can use soft. There's only one thing that you have to take into consideration, and that is tire temperature. Even though it's 1 lap, depending on how you ride the bike, you can actually run into some trouble with tire temperature. In my case, I seem to struggle a lot towards the end of the lap with grip, because the tire overheats. So in my case, instead of going for soft, I actually go for soft medium. It might not be as good as the soft tire on the first parts of of the lap, but towards the end it makes up for the lack of grip, because it can maintain the temperature much better than the soft tire. So this is something that you can play around with. It also applies to the front end. So if you feel like the front tire is overheating too much, you can try and go for the medium. And one last thing regarding the tires, I've noticed, especially on the front tire, the harder compounds, the medium and the hard tire, for some reason, and this happened already back on MotoGP 19 and MotoGP 20. I think it's an intended feature, but when you push a lot the front end during a hard braking zone, for some reason these harder compound tires, they don't low side as easily. Like you have that moment where the front end starts to slide when you're about to get a low side. Usually with a soft tire you will crash very quickly and it's really hard to recover it, but with the medium and the hard tire, like, it just goes, starts to slide, and you can hold it there for a little bit longer, and the bike doesn't understeer. It's like the bike keeps turning and you have the sensitivity, you can, you know, recover the bike just in time to make the turn. On some tracks that was very helpful. Actually was faster to run a harder tire on the front, but on this specific track it's just better to stick with the soft front, in my opinion. Okay, now that we have done the setup, let's have a look at the hot lap, and afterwards we will have an in-depth look at the lines that I take during the hot lap, and some other tips that I can give you in order to master this track. And last but not least, just so you guys know, this lap has been done on without balance performance, exactly as you guys will have to do it on the Rising Stars challenge. So yeah, let's have a look. Okay, so we start the lap here. We try to get a really good exit from the previous corner in order to maximize our speed on this finish start straight. Here we get our first braking zone. We will brake near the 200 meters board on the left. Try to keep the bike as upright as possible to maximize our braking performance. Do not scrub too much speed. Try to carry a little bit of speed through the turn, so the acceleration is not as aggressive when you come out of the turn. Try to, while exiting the corner, maintain a little bit of lean angle so the suspensions have some load on themselves, so the bike doesn't wheelie as much. Be smooth on the throttle and wait for that change of elevation before getting onto the power completely. Here we brake just after the shadow of the billboard, just before. Yet again, try to maintain the bike up as upright as possible. Be careful with this bump just before the apex of the turn. It easily unsettles and crashes the bike. Here the same thing. Try to accelerate with the bike leaned and keep it like that as much as possible. And then get on the gas completely just after that bump, right after the shadow that we just crossed before. Now here comes a really tricky part of the track. Brake a little bit earlier. It's really hard to master this braking zone. As I said before, keep the bike upright and slowly tipping into the turn and aim for this inside curve. It has some camber on the inside and will help the bike keep the line through that turn. Here we get on the acceleration and we short shift through the gears to minimize the wheel spin. It's good to have a little bit, but not too much, because if we have too much of that wheel spin, we will lose drive and we will lose acceleration on that turn. Here is very tricky, because before braking you need to tip in the bike to the other side and then brake. If you brake before turning the bike to the left, you will understeer and you will fail the corner entry. Here we are very smooth during the corner. Try to maintain a little bit of throttle input to hold the line. Here we just hold the front brake, no need to go for the rear brake. The camber of this turn holds the bike really well. And here we accelerate again, short shift quickly because the bike struggles so much to maintain grip on this turn. So we short shift the gears to manage those bumps and the lack of grip. And we're coming down. You are coming down to the last part of the track. Tricky braking zone as well. There's a change of elevation and a lot of bumps. We brake with both front and rear and try to aim for the inside curve as much as possible. I don't clip it as close as I could, but it's reasonably well executed. And here we come to the last turn. Just go with the front brake at the start of the braking and then apply the rear brake if you need that extra bit of braking performance. Clip the apex and then get on the gas and just go through the gears as quickly as possible. Don't rev the bike too much because there's a lot of bumps on this final part of the track, on that final acceleration. And yeah, there you have it. Those are more or less the tips and tricks that I had for you when it comes to the line that you have to take on Red Bull Ring. Now you just need to practice and put down the laps and the time, and you'll eventually be able to pull consistent fast laps at this track. So yeah, if you like this video, be sure to leave it a like and subscribe if you want more videos like this in the future. Okay, see you guys.